Hello, everyone. Pastor George here, and welcome to this Bible study recap on this Wednesday. And today in Bible study, we looked at Leviticus chapter 16. Now, Leviticus 16 is a pretty important chapter, 16 and 17 both. Although I'm gonna make reference to a verse from 17, but really today we focused on 16 because that's where the meat and potatoes of what I want to talk about is. Pretty important. So on Sunday, I talked about the structure of Leviticus and how it goes. Ritual, priesthood, purity, chapter 16 and 17, purity, priesthood, ritual. Kind of like a chiasm is what it's called. And I think all that does is it helps to organize the text, which is how it was given, right? So you have laws pertaining to those things, but at the center of it is this kind of out of place part of the book that talks about the scapegoat. Out of place being that you would expect it to not be where it is, but for whatever reason, it's at the center. And I know, when we look at this, we can tell why, because all the books of the Bible are pointing us towards the gospel, and Leviticus is no different than that. And so Leviticus has at its center this idea of the scapegoat. So if you were to sit down and read Leviticus 16, which I hope you do, there might be questions or things that pop up for you. So today I wanted to talk about three things. One of them I did want to talk about on Sunday, but just did not have enough time. There were lots of things that popped up that I'm sure people had questions on in my sermon in the book of Leviticus, but I really wanted to get to like the main things to set people up on how to read it and how to understand it and kind of what the overall thrust of Leviticus is. So just wanted to make that clear. So one of the things I didn't have time to talk about, but which features pretty prominently in this, and so this gives me a good time to discuss it, is animal sacrifice. Now, animal sacrifice is, of course, not unique to the Hebrew Bible, not unique to the Middle East at the time during this, right? It's not just those cultures. It was pretty much happening, as far as I'm aware, all over the world. Pretty much every culture has done this. I'm racking my brain right now, and I'm there probably is a examples of ones that have not, but I'm struggling to find them. And of course, when I talk about this, I'm talking about ancient cultures or even pre-modern cultures, right? Because of course, like, yes, medieval Europeans didn't do animal sacrifice, but their ancestors certainly did, right? Same thing with Americans today. Americans today generally don't do animal sacrifice. I've never seen it done here, but certainly our ancestors did it. And so, it just is like so when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking, has there ever been a group of cultures that hasn't done it? And I can't think of any. So it's not unique. But I think our question today, especially now these days that we have a very high relationship or high view of animals that didn't really exist before, the animal sacrifice is kind of scary or kind of a turnoff to a lot of people. And so, like, why did God use this? And of course, the thing to notice is that the way that animal sacrifice is talked about in Scripture and the way that it's performed and done in other places is worth noticing the difference. And so at the center of this is a ritual that involves two goats. And the first goat is sacrificed and given as a sin offering. The other, it has all of the sins of the community placed upon it, and it's left off into the wilderness, where, I mean, it could die, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea. I don't think it's meant that it's going to live forever and ever. I think the idea is that it goes out there and it dies. And so the thrust here is that these animals are paying the price of the sin offering of the community. This being said, right, this is different than how it's practiced in ancient Greece, for example. In the most of the cultures that I'm aware of, so like Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greco-Roman culture, so definitely in the Mediterranean area where this is taking place, this is a common way of getting the gods' attention, right? You kill animals in order to get the gods to notice you, and you do this as a way of pleasing them. So, if you read the Iliad by Homer or the Odyssey, the gods will talk about being pleased by the aroma of the burning of the fat from the bulls and things like that the Greeks are sacrificing. This is very different from the way that it's viewed in the Bible, right? God doesn't need sacrifices. He gives sacrifices to Israel to teach them about the importance of sin. But also, like, why then do they have to shed blood, right? Of course, they don't always have to. Many times sacrifices are given and it's not um, no, blood is not done, right? Usually these are offerings, but it's not necessary all the time that there has to be this. But God establishes this one to set up the importance of following the law, right? So the idea is that, like I talked about on Sunday, yes, like be merciful to people, but there still is punishment for breaking the law, and the punishment ultimately for everything leads to death, right? Sin is death. And so it shows people in a really tangible way what the wages of sin are, you know? Um, as Paul would say later, wages of sin is death. But also, it points us to the future where Christ is going to die and break the system because he's the ultimate and best sacrifice. So this is where it's interesting to go a chapter forward to 17. So this is when God is telling them not to eat blood. And again, kind of the interesting thing about eating blood, I know we have lots of like kosher laws today about it. It's people turn it into a diet thing. That's kind of how it's been understood, to be a healthy diet. But in the text itself, right, usually the reason that this is given is twofold. One, because it's a pagan practice and the people of Israel are not supposed to do that. So it's supposed to set them aside from everyone else. But the second is this, right? So God in chapter 17 says, if anyone of the house of Israel or the strangers who sojourn among them eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Therefore I have said to the people of Israel, no person among you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood. So the reason God gives is because he wants us to take blood seriously. It's not to be consumed, because just turning it into some sort of thing that gratifies you misses the point entirely, right? This is actually a very high view of what's happening to the animals. That the fact that the way that they're treated after being sacrificed is important, right? It's not about killing them and then getting the best medium rare steak you possibly can, which is how it was practiced in a lot of the world, because you would eat these animals. That is what would tend to happen after you would sacrifice them. But the point is that the blood is sacred to God. Blood is sacred to God, so he cares about when it's shed and why we should take that type of stuff seriously, right? Now, once the temple sacrifice is over with, there's no need for these regulations anymore because the ultimate blood has been shed, which is why we can have medium rare steaks or whatever today. Anyway, that's one of the major things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to just address animal sacrifice. Also, this is all about the Day of Atonement. So, very important part of the Hebrew Bible and a very important part of the religion. This is the idea of how God is going to cover the sins of the people. And so important just to know that, because this is tons of foreshadowing for Christ. The importance of sacrifice is laid out here, which you see built upon by Bible writers, biblical authors over the course of the book, but of course ties in well with the idea of animal sacrifice and why that's important. And the final thing I wanted to talk about is this name that pops up, and this would very much depend on the version of the Bible that you read. And so let's just go to, I think the first time it pops up is verse 8. Yes. So it says, talking about the goats, right? It says, and Aaron shall cast lots over the two goats, one lot for the Lord, and the other lot for Azazel. Now, if you have the NIV or the King James Version or several other different translations, it probably says, or for the desert, or for the scapegoat. I'm not quite sure which one of those is true. In fact, if you have the ESV or the NRSV, when you read this, you're actually not going to see the word scapegoat at all. And so what is this Azazel or scapegoat debacle, right? Because that's a pretty major difference between the two translations. So I want to talk about that, and luckily I've done a lot of reading on that recently because it's kind of one of those bizarre parts of the Bible that fascinated me. So you'll see in some translations, Azazel is a proper name, right? Like in the ESV, which is what I'm reading. And there's a lot of debate about this. And so there's basically two camps, and you can tell which camp your translators fell into by the way they translated this. So the way that you translate Azazel in Hebrew is the one sent out, you know. Um, and so there's a debate among scholars as to whether this is a proper name or a descriptive name. So it could be that Azazel, which is identified as a fallen angel later in history, kind of like in other books of the apocryphal books of the Bible, so not in our canon, but like books like First Enoch, things like that. Azazel is one of the fallen angels of heaven, so he's a demon. And so the idea here is that some translators will say, "Oh, this is a name for like the demon of the desert," not in the sense that it has any strong power over the people or whatever, but basically you're condemning the goat to go die in the desert in order to, uh, you know, either satisfy Azazel or to show how we hand over our sin to demons and devils and things like that. I would say that's a much more modern translation of what's going on here. And the older one, as far as I'm aware, is the scapegoat. And this is the idea that the word Azazel means the sent out one. And so therefore it is referring to the goat being sent out. And so you end up having translations like the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which does translate it as the sent away one. The Latin translation also translates the Hebrew Bible as saying the emissary goat, which is kind of funny, but the one that's sent away, that's sent out. Um, and then you have the King James version, although it's not the first to do this, but it's the most famous one that combines the idea of escaping with goat. So the scapegoat, so kind of like describing it's getting out of the goat is leaving the grasp of the people and going out into the wilderness. So there's a lot of debate about who that might be, and I wanted to just say, I mean, I read the ESV, but I actually think that evidence, at least as I understand it, points to it actually just being a goat that's sent out. I don't buy the whole it's for Azazel thing, even though the translators of the ESV do. But I just wanted to explain to you why you might see that discrepancy, because this is the scapegoat passage, and depending on your your translation, you might not even see the word scapegoat pop up there, and maybe that's the first time you've ever seen it. So I wanted to talk about it. Or you might never seen the word Azazel pop up, and so you might not have seen that before. I wanted to talk about it. All right, that is what I wanted to talk about today. Again, the overall thrust here is in this, God is pointing us to the cross, because Christ serves as the one onto whom we pour all of our sin and who takes our punishment for us. So we need to remember that because that's what Leviticus is aiming us towards. Reminding us of the mercy of God and his care for justice and holiness, and that we should live that out in our lives. So have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow for an episode of The New Thing. Peace out.